Welcome back to our Zenith Super Duty build. We're very behind schedule on the progress videos. In this video we're working on the elevator. As always, the first step is to find all of the parts, then clean and deburr them. The triangular pieces are the interior ribs of the elevator. The teardrop ribs are the end caps, and you can see the elevator spar on the left. To figure out which side of the end pieces is the top side, you have to draw a line between two tooling holes on each part and see which side of the part is bigger. It's an odd way to do that, but that's what the instructions say to do. Christina never likes how I clean things, so here she is fixing it. After that we cleco the ribs to the spars. It turns out the final size holes in the end pieces aren't actually the final size. You'll hear me say that a lot over the course of this build. There's not much to see here. We're putting rivets in holes getting ready to actually pull the rivets. And now for the riveting. Christina goes back to deburring the elevator skins while I finish riveting the ribs to the elevator spar. Another windy day in the hangar, but the view is nice. The elevator skeleton is mostly riveted together. We still have to add the supports for the trim servo bay, which is what I'm doing while Christina keeps working on the skins. Cleaning the parts takes a lot of time and effort. The elevator skeleton and rear skins are finally ready, but we haven't cleaned the nose skins yet. With that out of the way, it's time to put everything together. We move the elevator to the other side of the table to make it easier to work with the skins. What a nice looking row of cleco. The elevator needs to be flipped over so we can work on the bottom side, but the top side won't sit flat on the table with the cleco still in place. A few scrap 2x4s fixed that problem nicely. The trim servo needs some careful planning and test fitting before final installation. It's a pretty tight fit and the access hole isn't very big. The trim tab also needs thought through. The A3 rivet holes aren't pre-drilled and alignment is critical or the tab won't work. Less windy today, but still chilly. Our elevator skins came with some pretty serious scratches. In fact, a lot of the skin pieces looked like they had been handled roughly. We were hoping to keep the airplane shiny instead of painting it, but the scratches might force us to rethink that idea. Maybe we'll have to go with more patina look instead. Roger suggested that we try using Scotch-Brite on the scratches, and it kind of worked. But that doesn't remove the scratches, it only removes the metal around the scratches. The skin material is a lot thicker than it needs to be, so it's not a problem, but it's not ideal either. Hopefully we can buff out the matte surface without too much trouble. It looks like we're stuck with the deepest scratches though. Before the trim servo can be installed, it needs to be connected to the cable that runs up to the instrument panel. There isn't enough room inside the servo bay to do it after installation, and the access hole is too small for my hands anyway. Neither the servo nor the airplane kit came with connectors, or even any indication of what to do, so the builder has to just figure it out. I decided to solder splice the servo wires to the cable wires because I'm familiar with that process, because I didn't have any proper connectors handy, and because I didn't feel like waiting for connectors to arrive once I had ordered them, and for some reason we felt rushed when we were doing this part. If you're not very comfortable with splicing, then I recommend using a connector. Aircraft Spruce has a great selection of connectors that would work for this. I don't have a sheath cutter, so I had to resort to using a knife to remove the cable sheath. I was being careful not to nick the individual wires, so it took me a few tries to get all the way through the plastic. With that out of the way, I splayed the wires on both sides of the connection and started figuring out how to match up the wire colors. The Zenith provided cable's wire colors don't exactly match the servo wires. When in doubt, consult the documentation. I just happened to have a box of multicolored heat shrink tubing with all of the right colors in it. I don't know how many years that tubing has been sitting in my toolbox, waiting for its moment to shine, but it finally happened. It occurred to me that, before going much further, I should make sure the servo actually works. So I pulled out my trusty benchtop power supply, set it for 12 EV with a rather low current limit, and connected it to the servo power and ground wires. It works! Now it's time to solder the wires together. All of my electronics kit has been in storage for the last few years, and it's nice to have a reason to use it again. If you've ever soldered spliced splice wires together, then this segment should look familiar. Feel free to point out anything I did wrong in the comments. The wires are braided and very thin, so I'm tinning them ahead of time to make them easier to work with. I decided to use some flux because everything is dirty and my soldering iron tip needs to be cleaned. This flux is decades old and probably full of hazardous chemicals, but that's why it works so well. It's important to remember to put the heat shrink tubing on the wires before you solder them. Don't ask how I know that. You might be watching this and wondering, why is he doing this the hard way? Because I forgot my helper jaws at home. They're in a box somewhere and I completely forgot to look for them. So I have to do this the old-fashioned way. That works well enough at first, but eventually I have to enlist my lovely wife to hold the wires for me. With the soldering finished, it's time for the heat shrink tubing. Our hangar mate happened to have a heat gun sitting on the shelf, which was handy. You can't see it here, but I'm just putting the servo into the elevator to make sure it still fits. I don't know why it wouldn't, but I like to double check everything. After a short break, we're back to finishing the elevator. Before we can do that, we need to get the trim servo and the trim tab installed. We left the bottom skin unriveted for exactly this reason. The The access hole for the servo is too small, so we need to be able to reach under the skins. It's fiddly and tedious work, but we just took it slow and got it done. The clevis that comes with the servo that came with the kit doesn't fit on the servo horn that comes with the kit. I guess no one at Zenith ever bothered to check that. Nothing that couldn't be fixed with a handy Dremel tool though. Here you can see the before and after pictures of the servo clevis. I used the Dremel to lengthen the slot enough to clear the servo horn. We didn't have a bit skinny enough to fit in the existing slot, so I ended up drilling a larger hole at the end of the slot. The Zenith drawing says to make the servo rod 148 long, but doesn't say what units to use. We assumed that it's 148mm because nothing else made sense. However, after testing the trim tab travel range, we found that the rod should actually be 158mm. It's probably a typo on the drawing, and I mentioned it to Roger but never got a response. With everything finally connected but not yet riveted, it was time for testing. First up. Still chilly and still windy. Today we're finishing the trim servo in the elevator. Our local tech counselor stopped by to check on us and his timing was perfect. Riveting the servo in place and installing the cotter pin required at least 3 hands, and he showed up right when we needed him. We showed Tracy our handiwork with the skin scratches and he seemed to think it was fine but ugly. That'll have to be good enough. Instead of using a 2x4 to bend the nose skins, we used the wing struts still in their packaging. That worked pretty well and wasn't as cumbersome as a 14-foot long 2x4. In a few spots it looked like the nose ribs were trying to poke through the skin. We decided to take the skin off and adjust the ribs with a pair of pliers. Once the skin was off, it was obvious which bits were the problem, and it was easy to correct. With that finished, we buttoned it back up, adding more clicos just in case. A few of the holes were too tight for the rivets, so we drilled them out. At this point we hadn't yet learned about pusher sticks, so we're chewing up our fingers on the stubborn rivet holes, and drilling the really stubborn ones. Now for the fun part. We like to take turns with the rivet gun to share the fun. In hindsight we should have bought 2. Now that the top side is finished, we flip it over to do the bottom side. We turned it around too just to make it easier to get to the rivets. The wind has finally calmed down and the sun is poking through the clouds. We started the day by riveting the elevator control horn bracket to the front of the elevator. The electric puller wouldn't fit, so we had to use the manual squeezer. While riveting the A3 rivets for the trim tab, the rivet puller jammed. It looked like 2 A3 stems got wedged in the pusher tube at the same time. We couldn't figure out how to unjam it, so we have to order a replacement pusher tube. Until then, we're stuck with the manual squeezer. Right about now is when it jammed. Now you're just watching me trying to figure out what happened, and not having any success. We gave up and pulled out the manual squeezer. It works, but we've been spoiled by the electric puller. Doing the final connection for the trim servo. Here's what the rivet puller looks like when disassembled on my messy bench at home. The tube at the bottom right is the thing that got jammed, and there isn't enough of the stem sticking out to get a grip with pliers. We tried pushing something through from the other side, but the stems were just too well jammed. Eventually we gave up and ordered another pusher tube, but they're back ordered for at least a week. Despite that setback, we were able to keep going because the control horns need to be attached with the manual squeezer. There isn't enough clearance for the electric puller between the rivets and the flange. Thanks for watching. Be sure to follow us on our airplane building journey.